Hey there, Agile narwhals. That's the little whale that looks like a unicorn. I sure hope I pronounced that right. And welcome to another episode of Agile Bytes, the podcast sponsored by Integrity Inspired Solutions, where we build software in an agile manner day in and day out. If you've been following along, we've been talking about MVPs. In fact, we've been talking about MVPs even if you haven't been following along. Shame on you. You should follow along. But today we're going to talk about the aspect of an MVP where we define the success of the MVP. What does victory look like? Hopefully you've been thinking about this in some form or fashion from the beginning, right? Because the whole point of approaching developing software in a MVP-centric manner is because of this, right? It's not because this product is big and we would like a scaled down version of it for budgeting purposes. It's because we are trying to learn something, right? We are trying to discover something about our product that will indicate success or failure without having to build the whole thing and then find out, right? So as we're thinking about our MVP, hopefully this whole time, we've at least had at a high level an idea of what this would look like, right? What would we find out? What would we get meaningful information about that would shape the product going forward? Either it confirms that we're on the right track, or it gives us information that allows us to make key changes and pivots, or maybe tells us this project just isn't worth doing, right? And we need to think about something else. I said in the beginning, when we were talking about MVPs, I talked about a hypothesis, right? And this is where the hypothesis really comes into play because most of your indicators of success are going to be related to your hypothesis. You want to know something. Something has to be true or false, and that will tell you if you should keep going down this road or if you shouldn't. Change roads, go in a different direction, or just quit walking altogether. Go drive to some other trailhead and start hiking over there, right? What is that thing? What things, if they turned out to be true or not true, would cause you to rethink what you were doing, or it would convince you that you're on the right track, right? That you are poised for success if you keep going in this direction. These questions are what form your success indicators. Often MVPs have more than one, right? You may have only one hypothesis, but proving or disproving the hypothesis is only one success indicator. There are other things that we are concerned about. And so as we talk about success indicators, I'm going to give you some different examples. I'm going to talk about the categories you want to think about when you're thinking about putting together your success indicators, but you may have several from the list, right? I find that most MVPs usually have at least 2 or 3. Don't feel like you have to focus on one. However, the indicators that you pick are important. You don't want to create a shopping list of indicators. The success indicators are not things that you would like to see. They are not things you want to happen. They are the things that if this doesn't happen, then we need to rethink what we're doing, right? Either in terms of direction or viability. But if these things did happen, then we're gold. We know we're doing the right thing. We are convinced. We have convinced ourselves that this is the right product direction. So if you think about it that way, if you think about the things that would actually kill your project or motivate you to keep putting money into it, then I think that will keep your list already fairly minimal, right? Because there may be a lot of things you would like to see, but there's really only a few things that would really make you think, okay, this is not where we want to go, right? We want to change this up. Kind of like when you're setting goals or coming up with the O's and OKRs or the K's in OKRs, a specific is better than general, right? So if I've got an MVP and my success indicator is people like it, right? Or that people will buy it, those are fine. That we do want those things to happen, right? And if people won't buy it or people don't like it, we probably don't want to keep going in our direction. But it's kind of hard to figure out if we have achieved those things, right? Whereas instead, if I said something like, I want my beta users to give me at least 80s on my NPS survey, or we've sold this version of the product, or we've pre-sold the product, to at least 100 people by this time frame, then that's better, right? Then we have a much clearer indicator of success or not. And so, you already have a decent idea of how much this is going to cost you. Maybe that's one of your success indicators, right? I have to make the money back for this MVP in the next 3 months or something to that effect, right? So I want to talk about the different areas where you might think of success indicators. And I am loosely adapting the 4 flows from Tame Flow. If you're not familiar with Tame Flow, it's Steve Tendon's big contribution to organizations that are trying to develop software more effectively and more efficiently. And he talks about 4 flows in an organization. And I didn't pick those flows and then come up with stuff. It's just as I was coming up with success indicators that I've seen over the years from different organizations that I've worked with, I realized that they all pretty much fall into these 4 flows. Now, I'm loosely adapting some of these flows a little bit to expand their scope beyond what they mean in Tame Flow. I'm not going to call them all the same thing that they show up in Tame Flow, but I want to give credit where credit is due. As I began looking at the list I was putting together, I'm like, man, these all roll up into the 4 flows that Steve Tendon talks about. So if you're interested in the 4 flows in your organization and how you might improve them or measure them or use them, you might take a look at Tame Flow or reach out to Steve Tendon as an individual and find out more about that. For the purposes of this podcast, I'm just going to kind of talk about the categories and talk about examples that come from those categories. So one of the flows that probably most people are concerned about is the financial flow. Are we going to make money, or are we going to save money, or are we going to protect money if we build this product? And these are often the things that are top of mind for people, and in some ways the easiest to come up with because they really speak a lot to the survivability of the product idea. You know, if I build an MVP and 0 people are interested in it, the odds of people being interested in the full-blown product are pretty low. Yeah, more features might flip the switch for a few people, but it's not going to be a raging success, right? If people aren't even interested in the core value proposition of it. So some examples of financial success indicators might be that this MVP needs to generate $10,000 in sales revenue in the next 2 months, 2 months after we release it. Or it might be this MVP needs to add 20 users to the subscriber base over the next month. We can obviously extrapolate all kinds of things. And these financial success indicators are going to be very heavily dependent on the product, on your audience, what you're trying to accomplish. And like everything else, keep in mind that we are setting these success indicators for the MVP, not the whole product. You may have strategic goals for the product as a whole, but the thing we just built, how do you know that we're on the right track, right? And so financial impact may be part of that. I will say it might not be part of it, right? Depending on how you're using this MVP. If it's an internal line of business product and I'm building it to increase efficiency, for example, yeah, in the long run, that does translate into dollars, but I'm not really thinking about like a revenue target or increasing sales or increasing the user base or bringing in more money necessarily. So you might not have any financial success indicators. It's just that they are very, very common and they are often easy for people to come up with. Another kind of success indicator you might consider are technical success indicators, because sometimes when you are building things, there is a high degree of technical risk. Maybe nobody has ever done what you're doing before, right? And so if you can't get it done on your MVP, there's not really a reason to keep building out the rest of the product because this core technological hurdle couldn't be crossed, right? And so your first MVP may just be to validate the technology, right? Can this product even do technically what we need it to do, in a reasonable time frame and a reasonable budget with the resources that we have, right? So some examples of things that might come from the technical flow are this MVP should successfully read and update data that currently lives in our mainframe, right? In our AS400 or our iSeries or whatever. Like this MVP needs to be able to talk to it back and forth. And the data needs to be synchronized up and it needs to be accurate in both places. That would be an example of a technical success. If we build our first iteration of this product and we can't talk to the AS400 or the data gets out of sync and that causes problems or there are errors in transmission, we want to kind of rethink the direction, right? Do we just need more time? Is this something that's just impossible? Do we need to think of a different way to solve this problem? Those things may all be true, but the one thing we don't want to do is keep building features on top of this thing right? Because we are not successful from a technical perspective. Another example might be, maybe this MVP is a software as a service, and whatever infrastructure we've spun up for it needs to have 99% uptime. If it's not up 99% of the time, we don't want to keep building on top of it, right? That may be something we define for ourselves. Let's take some time and solve that problem, or see if that problem is even solvable, given the resources that we have. But if we can't have 99% uptime, what we don't want to do, and we've defined that as success, what we don't want to do is keep building more features on top of this thing that keeps going down, right? Because it's only going to get worse, right? The more load, the more demand we put on this thing that we're building, this problem is only going to get worse and worse. Let's not keep putting it off and then come to find out that this is just going to be a plague, right? Let's deal with it early, and it may just shape our direction. It may even shape our architecture for the product going forward. Another category where we can look at success indicators is operational. And this has to deal with how effectively your organization, or in this case, perhaps your user base, is getting things done. So we might have a success indicator like this MVP has to get invoices to payment processing 20% faster than the software we're using today. If we don't get a performance gain of at least 20%, then this product is not worth building, right? And so we build the MVP, we see the time it takes to get invoices to payment processing. Is it at least a 20% improvement? If it isn't, then we might want to stop. Should we build this? Do we need to change the way we're going about this to get that performance increase that we need? And of course, if we end up with an 80% increase, then yeah, we've definitely confirmed we're on the right track here, right? This is definitely worth doing, and it's worth continuing in this direction. We might have a success indicator like this should create a quote with 100% accuracy, barring data entry mistakes. Software is not going to do the right thing if we as the users have put the wrong thing in, right? So we don't always want to make 100% accuracy a success indicator, but it is quite reasonable to want our software to be 100% accurate, assuming what we've given it to work with is accurate, right? And if we can't get 100% accuracy, maybe that's just not good enough. Now, in some cases, maybe it is. Maybe 90% accuracy is fine. But that's up for you to decide. It's just an example of an operational success indicator that we might look at. And then finally, our success indicators might be psychological. They deal with the user experience, right? They deal with morale. So for example, we might say 90% of our users say that this is easier to use than the software we currently have in place, for example. Or we might use the example I gave earlier. 80% of a test group gives us 80 or above on a Net Promoter Score survey or something like that. So these would be examples of things, do the users like it? Are they interested in it? Do they think we should keep building it? Do they think we're going in the right direction? That has to be a success indicator. Sometimes we build software just because people are miserable with what they've got, right? And it might not necessarily be faster. It might not necessarily bring us more money, but it keeps our turnover down, right? It keeps people happy, and it's a delight to use. I think of a story Menlo Innovations told once about software that they made for the Department of Motor Vehicles. I don't know if you've been to the DMV lately. I think most people can agree that most of the time it's a pretty dreary place, both for the people who work there and the people who have to go there. No one gets excited about going to the DMV. There aren't festive colors. You don't hear people going wahoo very often at the DMV. It's just kind of a hard place to be. And so Menlo, when they were building software for the DMV, put in a feature where the employees could set a background photo. It had virtually no business value whatsoever, but the employees would set up photos of the beach or their family or something like that. And the users came back and reported that that was their most beloved feature. It really changed their day. It kept their spirits up. It helped them be nicer to customers. It helped them keep their dreams and values and what was important in perspective, and sometimes even help them escape a little bit from time to time. And so that could be a success indicator, right? We just want people to like it. We just want them to be happy when they use it. So again, I want to point out that there's different success indicators you may want for your MVP. What you don't want is like a huge list. Keep it down to a few. Because again, we're not trying to pick out the things we hope we see, we want to pick out the things that will meaningfully cause us to rethink this project if these success indicators don't trip, right? So, we may want to generate $100,000 of revenue from this MVP, but if we didn't, if we generated $95,000 of revenue from this MVP, would that cause us to rethink it? If not, then we haven't defined our success indicator, have we? What we want to do is we want to find the things that would give us pause, that would make us think, okay, we got to think about this differently. Either the scope or our approach or our design or our idea. Maybe this just isn't a good idea, right? What are those things? So we want to keep that list reasonably small, but we want to keep it lethal, right? We want to be rigorous about it. If we don't hit these success indicators, then we can't just keep being optimistic, right? We can't just hope they'll turn around, or we can't just go, well, it's probably because we only have a limited feature set. But once we add these other things, I'm sure these metrics will go up. Well, they may go up, right? But your experiment didn't work. So what does that mean? And it doesn't mean you have to abandon the project, but it does mean you need to spend some time thinking about your approach and probably change something. Also, we need the scope of these indicators to be limited to the current MVP, not for the final product. I realize that may seem obvious. I promise you it is not obvious to everybody. So when you're coming up with these indicators, especially if you're using hard numbers, make sure they are realistic for what you are getting out the door with that MVP, and not something that bundle is unlikely to accomplish. Finally, you need to consider what you're going to do if these indicators aren't met. What conversations are you willing to have? How much are you willing to revise your idea or your approach or your solution, your design? Are you willing to drop this product altogether if these success indicators are not met? Or at what level of failure would you consider dropping this product altogether? I think that the products that have the best chance of success are the ones where the people who are invested in them are willing to walk away from the table if they're not seeing what they need to see. And our emotional attachment to our idea and our designs and our dream and our hopes for the future can really, really get in the way of that. So pick good success indicators, run them by other people. Have people hold you accountable to them if they don't get met. Again, it doesn't mean you have to kill your dream just because you didn't hit your success indicator. Maybe your indicator wasn't even very good. I don't know. But it does mean you have to pause. It does mean you have to rethink things. So don't build your MVP until you have a very, very good idea of what will constitute a successful run. Thanks everyone for listening to Agile Bites. Agile does sometimes bite, but we don't think it always has to. If you enjoyed what you heard today, don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you happen to be using. And if you can, leave us a comment, because we'd love to hear your feedback. What things would you like to hear about? What things did you hear that were valuable to you today? You can also head over to integrityinspired.com to sign up to our email list. But that's all for today, folks. We'll see you next time.